Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
Sir Anthony Cragg, many awards, including the Turner Prize, and he is obviously a very, very well-known artist, sculptor. We will understand during the interview why and how is his life in Germany. He has been a sculptor since the beginning, since he moved to Germany in 1977, and he is also a professor at the university. Now we are going to start with Tony Cragg, speaking about his recent opening of a fantastic exhibition at Houghton Hall in Norfolk, which is one of the most beautiful Palladian houses in England in a wonderful landscape. Lord Cholmondeley is the owner of Houghton Hall, and he is very, very keen on Tony Cragg's work. And the exhibition was made possible also by the art gallery dealer Tadeusz Ropak. As we all know, is a very well-known galleries in Salzburg, in Paris, London, and recently also in Korea. Now, Tony, what would you say about this Orton Hall exhibition, which is your last baby?
Yes, it's a magnificent, it's a very beautiful part of Britain. And Houghton Hall is, as you've already said, a very important building. It actually built by the first Prime Minister, Walpole, and the grounds are large, expansive. They have some very large vistas, and the landscape's quite flat. So it's very, very structured. You know, I'm not the first sculptor to exhibit there. They've had some really fine exhibitions in the past with Henry Moore and Richard Long, Anish Kapoor. And so I'm in the row of several others.
James Turner and Damien Hirst. So you're now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're the sixth person, right?
Yeah, so I couldn't remember all of the things. So it's obviously a situation where Lord Cholmondeley, or David Rock-Savage, as we call him, has the intention of showing contemporary arts. And I think it really works very well. The situation is very structured, it's very rigid, it's a powerful European statement. And of course, we're only individual artists. Our work has a completely different energy and perhaps a different meaning in that context.
If I'm not wrong, you have 11 sculptures who are outdoors and 20 smaller pieces who are in the staterooms of the building, of the house.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
What do you mean when you describe yourself as a radical materialist? Or do you still describe yourself as a radical materialist?
Yeah, I would. I could describe myself in other ways as well, but I do. I'm a sculptor. We study material. We study the form of materials. We study what the meaning of materials are, how they feel, and what ideas we develop out of them. I am very much reliant on material. On one hand, practically, and on the other hand, everything we are, everything around me, everything I see, I mean, even this virtual conversation with you has a material base. And we're sitting at each ends of this communication, and you have a material brain, material thought. So I think there is a material base for everything. And I do believe that, yes.
But you don't sculpt me or any other person because your sculpture is not figurative, like sculptures like Rodin or Mayol or even Giacometti in a way. Your sculpture are incredible. You have a special use of various materials and you build these twisting forms, if we can say so. How did you become this kind of sculpture? Why did you do this?
I think it's simply that initially I was just interested, not in making sculpture. That wasn't my intention. My intention was just to see what material can do to me, how it can change, how a form, a color, a texture can change my ideas or my emotions. When I was working with materials, I found that was very immediate, very spontaneous, and something that changed in a very, very dynamic manner. And I thought, well, making stuff, and then you're looking at nature, looking at geological formations and other things, I always found looking at nature, I found very exciting and, if you like, inspiring. And this idea, which is a 19th century idea of European sculpture to kind of copy the figure. I mean, it just never seemed to be, I had to do that in the art school as an exercise, but it never seemed to me to be a very relevant or a very important thing to do. And up to the 19th century, of course, it had, you could talk about Mayol and Rodin and even Brancusi. Yes, of course, because that's all sculpture was. But after the beginning of, towards the end of the 19th, beginning of 19th century, sculpture expanded. It realized that we had emotions about everything around us. That's why you think about what you put on in the morning and what you eat for breakfast and how your apartment is and who you consort with and where you go in the daytime. All these decisions are, in a sense, if you like, there's a rational basis, but there's also an aesthetic component to them. And this aesthetic component is what drives your existential decisions, is bound in the material. And I think that's an enormous job, an enormous task, if you like, for sculptors today. So we have sculptors today working on DNA. We have sculptors working on the land. We have sculptors working still with the human figure, because human figure is still very important. And even in my own work, I mean, I build things because I want to know the work I make always has an internal structure, with the belief that what we see on the surface of things is only the consequence of what's underneath. If I was making a figure, I wouldn't want to say, this is what I look like. I would want to know why I look like that. And so that's the basis of my work. And I do have figurative elements in my work because it's us that make the material. In a way, the material may be there without us, but we're the ones that give it form. It's our brains that give it form and give it color. Color doesn't, in red, white, and yellow, they don't exist anywhere in the universe excepting in our own minds. We make the color. And I think that's the fascinating thing. So I see sculpture has become a study of the material world, not in the way scientists study it, but it tells us what it means and how we feel about it. And I think they're very important aspects of our existence.
You said a few words that make me go back to your life. I mean, somehow you were raised with your brother in your grandfather's farm, and therefore you were very keen on geology since your early age. And then later, maybe because your father was an electric engineer or something like that, you wanted to be a scientist at the beginning. So how did you realize that you were not a scientist or a geologist, but you were an artist?
Well, the thing is my grandfather was a farmer, South England, in Sussex. And my father, in generally the way things used to run, he would have taken over the farm. But he didn't want to do that. He became an electrical engineer, as you mentioned. And in those times, in the 50s and the 60s, I mean, there was a belief that technology would solve all problems, would be the future, the answer to all the problems of the future. And because we moved around so much, and my father was always working on different projects in the aeronautical industry, that, I went to lots of different schools. So in the end, with one thing or the other, what was easier for me to follow was the science in school. So I thought, my father's son, I thought that's what I would do. But I left school, and when I left school, I was fortunate to work in a laboratory, but I realized I was very young. I was only 18, 19, something like that. And I realized it's really not what I wanted to do. And I just started to draw in that period of time in the laboratory. And I just became more interested in the drawings than in the experiments. And it was also an interesting time in society in Britain. It was 1968, 1969. And so I went to art school and met, for me at the time, a brand new world full of exciting prospects. And that's been my life after that.
So you said two things, which one is, and let's start from the first one, that you were drawing. You prefer to draw. So are you an autodidact in drawing, or you went to school for drawing? And are you still drawing? What are you drawing?
Well, no, I would say that in the very beginning, because I think I always felt I was very fortunate, because actually in school, I don't remember ever having art classes. So I think that stopped me being taken off in some weird direction. So I enjoyed drawing for myself. So maybe in some ways, perhaps a little autodidact. But I was keen, so I immediately when I was in art school, obviously people tell you this and how, and the conventions of drawing and how one can draw better. But even drawing is so exciting. See, when the minute you put the pencil on the page and you start to do something, you have immediately the curves, the quality of the line and whatever. You immediately have an emotion. You have, and then slowly ideas evolve out of it. And even if you don't sit there and try and draw something, or draw something that exists, I get very bored in using one material, whether it's graphite or clay or whatever, to copy something that already exists. That's a very uninteresting activity for me. So the drawing continues even today. It's maybe the beginning of all the work, most of the work at least. There are all sorts of things to draw. There's stuff that is around me that I want to draw. I want to make a note of something, so I draw it. I have people working with me here, helping me make my work, and then I draw for them and for me to understand exactly what we could possibly go, where we could go with the work, deciding positions. It's easier to draw than make sculpture, to be honest. And I just draw for pleasure, and I think that's it's a fantastic activity. There's a thing people say in England, I can't draw a straight line, I can't draw. But I think drawing it's just like writing or mathematics. I think it's a wonderful facility that everybody should actually have.
And then when you went to Germany before later discovering France, how come you became a friendly colleague with artists like Gerhard Richter and Joseph Beuys? I mean, why? Where did you meet them? Did you exchange ideas? You show work together? What happened?
No. What actually happened is that I studied in the Royal College in London, which was a luxury for me because we were given very substantial studios. And it was a fantastic privilege and a great experience to work there for 3 years. And during that time, my professor there, Bernard Meadows, one day he arrived, he said, Tony Cragg, we're sending you to France. And so this was my first major exploit abroad. I'd been abroad to Italy once before, but because I was sent off for a year to live in Metz and work in an art school there. And for the first time, a kind of provincial view of the world, suddenly you see, there are French artists with a completely different position. And they are associating in movements like Arti Povera and Italian movements, and German artists were involved. And I thought, this is a whole new world, very exciting. And my girlfriend at the time was German. And she was always saying, no, you should come to Germany. But, we were a little reticent, to be honest, in the 60s to go to Germany. But in the end, I went, and exactly the same experience I had going to France, where you think, wow, this is such a beautiful culture, such exciting and different ways of doing things, but very impressive. And in Germany too, highly cultured society with a lot of dynamic and all sorts of things going on. And when I finished my studies in London, I decided, my wife was still studying, I would come to Germany for 1 year. And I was very fortunate. I was offered a job, work in the academy in Düsseldorf. It's a very famous academy with fantastic artists, like the ones you mentioned, like Gerhard Richter and Beuys, but many others, Nam June Pai, Kunelis, and many, Jan Dibbits, Marcus Lupertz. So that was my association. In general, I was a younger person. I had good relations with them, but I wasn't in their circle of friends. I can't say that. I was a younger artist, a younger person, but I had good relationship with several of these people. And I admired them, of course. They were, in their way, great artists. So, for me, it was a very fantastic situation, yeah. But we didn't exchange ideas.
But you are British. You are very well recognized in Britain because you had 3 years at the Royal College. Then you also had, as we said, the Turner Award. You are a Sir. Why do you keep on living in Germany?
When I came here, it was relatively easy to find a studio. Wuppertal is a city that I really like living in. The academy in Düsseldorf was an amazing experience for me. I worked there for over 38 years, so it was a major part of my life. And I must say that in Germany, people have been very generous to me. I am British, I feel British. My sense of humor, my way of looking at the world is still very much reliant on my upbringing and my early years.
What about your children?
What about them?
They inherited some English things, or they are completely German?
I think they're quite German, but I mean, my daughter, the youngest one, she did her studies in China and studied architecture in Stockholm, and then finished her studies as a filmmaker in Columbia University. So, I mean, it's quite a cosmopolitan life. And a couple of my sons have lived in foreign countries. In Britain, I had a son who lived in Britain for 3 or 4 years. But we just have the working basis, and even my relationship to the people that work with me in my studio. I have a group of people that help me with my work, and they've worked for me for over 30 years. We're like, I wouldn't say like family, but we're very close. I do live in another country. Part of the time I live in Sweden on the West Coast, which is a beautiful place to live just because the nature is very wild and very inspiring, I find. But I don't know why I didn't come back to Britain. It's very important to me, Britain, the relationship to Britain, but I've never seen an opportunity to come back.
Are you sad about what happened with Brexit?
Yeah.
You don't care, or you think it's good?
No, I think I really am sad. I mean, I think whatever the arguments are, I mean, we've heard them all, the pound, shilling and pence arguments and all those things. I think the reality that Europe has been peaceful for a long time, we understood each. When I was a child, the French were the frogs, the Germans were the krauts, and everybody was some strange, unknown quantity. And over the last 60 years, we got to know each other. We've shared our cultures with one another. It's improved in both ways, the quality and the meaning of our lives. And I think I'm very sad too that a part of that has gone away from us. And I also think my idea would have been the European Union isn't probably ideal. We know that. It's too cumbersome. But then I think it would have been really more important to stay there and try and get it right rather than turn your backs on it. So it's done now.
Your work is everywhere. For instance, in front of the Central Station in New York, as well as in the St. Agnes Church in Cologne, or in front of in Knightwood in England, and in many other countries, right? You like the idea that your works stand in a public place and that they are there?
You know, I think sculpture really is important. It's not decoration. I think it really helps us to think about the world. We live in a society where our industry destroys material. We're destroying nature. So we're responsible for a reduction of form on the planet. Reduction of form means a reduction of ideas, a reduction of emotions, a reduction of language. You have to think everything we have in our minds, every word has come out of the material. But we are responsible for impoverishing the material quality of the world. And so I think that a sculpture really is important. It actually has a function. But if you look in the world, there's very, very little sculpture. When you say my work's everywhere, that's just not true. I can tell you how many works. But I mean, if you consider all sculptors' artworks, there's very little. And if you think about constellations and forms that have been created in order to have an emotional or an intellectual effect, you're really looking, most of the material world is boring, repetitive, geometrical, lowest common denominator forms. And with that, we destroy the material world and the environments around us and our possibilities to think and to exist. So, I mean, I think sculpture is really very important. So it's not just a territorial matter, because on that level, sculpture is very, very rare. It's a very rare group of objects.
There are very few sculptures?
Yes, very much, very so.
What about your students? What did they want to become? I mean, you have been a professor for many, many years. What did you teach them, and what these students are going to become? Are they going to be sculptors, artists?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't teach anymore. I stopped teaching several years ago. But I mean, over the years where I did teach, many of my students have gone on to continue their work. And even if they don't do that, art school education is a fantastic education. It teaches people to look at things, to analyze things, to think about things, to think deeply and respond deeply, meaningfully to the world around them. So, I mean, I know in Britain they've been very busy destroying the art schools. I really felt I have an enormous privilege in having been in a British art school at the time I did. After that, I mean, and there was, of course, in and around Britain with the new sculpture group, there was a reaction. But in generally, the government hasn't been very supportive of art schools. But art school education is a fantastic education, and art students always make something out of it.
But to go back to sculpture, you said there are there are not many sculptures in the world. But let's take an example. For instance, at the end of June of last year, right, in the middle of the pandemic, they have installed a 6-meter tall bronze sculpture of yours in front of the new Bundestag, which is the building in Germany.
Yeah.
This is a symbol, right? I mean, sculptures are also symbols because after all, a sculpture is not useful, right? It's not a building, is not decorative because a 6 meters tall bronze sculpture cannot be in a living room, right?
Yeah.
It's even difficult maybe to be in a museum. So sculpture stay most of the time, if they are in bronze or in a strong material, they stay outside. Everybody can see them. You don't have to pay a ticket, and there they are.
Yes, I know. So I'm very happy that I've had the opportunity to place in a city like Berlin, place a sculpture. But if you go around the city, and actually Berlin is quite well, despite its history, it's quite well equipped with sculptures on some level compared to the number of cars. No, I mean, you have to see it in relation to the other material around you, one sculpture and 10,000 cars. I mean, it's a rare use of material. The use of material generally is utilitarian, as you just said. It has to be useful. But sculpture is a rare, non-utilitarian use of material. But it doesn't mean to say it's not useful, because the forms we have around this, my sense of the world is, when I see the world, I have the feeling I'm only looking at the top of the iceberg. I'm not really seeing the whole thing. We only see we have no idea what absolute reality looks like. And so left and right of everyday reality, and sculpture as material.
This, let's say, abstract sculpture of yours, which is, let's say, the sculpture of, not the same, but Lang, Henry Moore, Mario Merz, Giuseppe Pennot, I mean, other artists who are doing sculptures who are not representing a person or something. Before, sculptures in the cities were mostly kings on a horse, or heroes, or politicians, or famous artists or philosophers, and so on and so forth. Before that, for instance, let's take the Egyptian time, they were doing obelisks. They were not representing the human figure, right? And even the Sphinx is not really a human figure. So maybe the contemporary art, the new art, is going back to a very old time, right? Because, as you said, there is no specific use. If you put the sculpture of a king on his horse or soldiers representing a war, then it has a specific meaning, right? To remember something specifically. Your shapes are, I don't know, something else.
Well, I mean, what you've talked about is an interesting way of looking at sculpture. I mean, you're right. Historically, sculpture was a power symbol. It was something it's difficult to make, and it's usually made in a time where people are not working on the fields or fighting a war or something else. You have to have material, you have to have tools, you have to have time and energy and space to do it. So sculptures, it has these needs. And in the past, it was made for the monarchy, for the church, as a power statement. Now, at some period in the time of the Greeks, it was even fantastic that human beings could even recognize themselves, that there weren't that many mirrors, but they could actually recognize themselves, that they saw themselves as there was a lot of work to be done through the initial classic recognition of the human being as an individual, developing into one even at the end of the 19th century with a psyche, with a subconscious and with something else. And so there was, even in terms of the human figure, there was enormous amount of work, and it took several thousand years to do that. But at the same time, all materials have an effect on us. And you see, When you talk about Brancusi, he comes from a slightly different culture. So he brings this kind of Byzantine shape into the thing. And then you have something like, when you say abstract, I don't know, I'm never very happy with that term. But then you see something like Tatlin, and you see just a structure with steel. And all he's doing is he's expressing a modern time of structures, of power, of a different kind of order in the world. So the sculpture of the time always expresses where you are. And if you look at the work, for example, of Henry Moore and the artists of the 40s and 50s, they want to have a new relationship to nature. They locate humanity in its natural context. They are very humanitarian in their concerns. So there is something immediately involved in the form, which has a meaning in the wider cultural history and the context. In the 60s and 70s, there was a new time. Immediately after the Second World War was something like pop art. And it was very fast and very attractive and very superficial in a lot of ways. And a lot of artists like Artie Porvera started, in Europe, there was a lot of new things going on in the countries that had been participating in the Second World War, because they had to develop a new culture. And to do that, they needed new forms. They weren't happy to even just produce another figure. What kind of figure would they produce? They looked at the material to find what was in that material. So I'm in a sense, all of us, as we all are. We're all in a flow of the development of the material in a sense, and end up being involved in the things that are relatively relevant to your time and the needs of your culture.
Now, you are a famous artist. People know you all over the world. You are in museums, in grounds. What is your future?
My future? I hate this way to say it's obsessive, but the thing is this, that the more one makes, as a sculptor, it takes a long time. While you're making something, your mind is going on and saying, if I do just a little bit this or that, it would be going in a different direction, would have a different meaning. And when the work is finished, I very often think, there were these moments. If I'd have done that, it would have been a different expression, a different idea. And so maybe I go back and try again to see what I get out of in that direction. What happens is that you end up with so many things you still have to do. And so that is I'm in my studio every day. And now 72, and I still have relatively good health, and I'm still chasing my work.
But do you have new challenges? You have, I don't know, there's anything you would like to achieve that you didn't?
In terms of making sculpture, yes, enormous amount. It's a little bit ironic maybe, but this COVID time has been quite good to a lot of artists. We've been in our studios and we've concentrated on our concerns, and we've just managed to develop the work. And I think in the last year, and the number of things I've actually got into have been very encouraging. So there's an enormous amount to do. But as I was just saying, as an artist, you never know exactly. I'm not a designer, so I don't know exactly what this work will look like when I finished it.
The 11 sculptures that you have at Houghton Hall,
yeah,
you made them for that exhibition?
Yes, some of them. I made, of the outdoor sculptures, I made 3. They've never been exhibited before. And most of them have been made in the last 8 or 10 years. And I think with the exception of one sculpture. And on the indoor work, there's been a lot of new glass work that has not been exhibited before. And in the stone room, there are 3 quite large sculptures which are completely new. In fact, to be honest, I've never seen them together. So I'm very keen to come to Britain to see that sometime soon.
And what is going to happen to your sculptures? Are they going to stay there? Are they going to go to some collectors? Are they going to... You don't know.
Well, I don't know. I borrowed a couple of works for the exhibition, and we have a foundation where the work has to go back into it. But I have several exhibitions coming up in the next 3 years.
Where are they?
in Vienna, in the museum there, and in Denmark, in the Art Museum. A lot of places. I mean, in Venice, in the library where Galileo showed the world that the planet, the Earth, was a sphere. So a lot of exhibitions to do. So I'll be using those sculptures in those things. And we have a sculpture park here, which we're very happy to install new work into for our visitors.
Do you have an archive of all your drawings?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah. I have someone that runs the archive, and so we know exactly what they've done, which I forget, and where it all is. Yes. Yeah.
The observation of a sculpture like yours, whatever it means, the word means, it has a spiritual value, because when you look at a sculpture that doesn't have a specific purpose, it's like looking at a tree or looking at the sea or looking at the moon. It has this kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask you something. Did you put a sculpture in Torino, in Italy? Did you have a sculpture of yours at the time of the Olympic Games?
Yes. I have quite a large points of view, it's called, which is installed in a park in Torino, yes.
I just wanted to tell you that Torino is my city and that I live in a little town or village next to Torino. And in order to go every day, I have to pass by your sculpture.
You have to. Okay.
And so I'm very familiar with your work. So I'm very proud, and thank you very much for giving me this interview.
So my pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Alain Elkann interviews.